Well, let's waste no time. The Oracle has arrived in the studio. It's Chris Hedges, and I'm very glad to wish you, Chris, a Happy New Year. Glad you spent it with us here on the Mother of All Talk shows. My condolences to the people of New Orleans who have suffered in the early hours of the morning a terrorist atrocity, which on the face of it appears to be yet another murderous attack emanating from the alphabet soup of extremism of the ISIS, Al-Qaeda variety. Unless you can tell me any differently by updating me, that's how it currently looks. Your views on it, please.
I don't know why anyone's surprised after a year of genocidal assault in which not only are Western countries like the United States complicit, but have embraced the role of essentially arming and sustaining the genocide. It's, you know, what the CIA calls blowback. So I think every day that the genocide continues in Gaza, it's just another advertisement for the hypocrisy, of the racism, the callousness of Western nations such as the United States. So supposedly there was an ISIS flag found in the truck. It was, you know, it would only happened a few hours ago, but it seems to point to an extremist attack by a jihadist, or at least somebody who identified with jihadist groups. But I don't know why anyone's surprised. I mean, this is what happens. They don't, you know, people who stand up to Western countries like the United States, or if you want to look at a sophisticated military like Israel, they don't have an air force. They will use the cruder forms of, you know, trucks, box cutters, whatever, suicide vests. But yeah, I think this is a harbinger of what's coming.
Yeah, but I get the point that you're making. The United States is in full-scale complicity and direct involvement, in fact. In Sana'a in Yemen yesterday, British and American aircraft were killing Yemenis all over again. I get that point. But what about the apparent contradiction that your government and mine are fully behind the ISIS Al-Qaeda front now running Syria, yet an ISIS Al-Qaeda type fanatic is murdering Americans in New Orleans? How do we square that?
Well, I think that's part of the ineptitude of, in particular, U.S. foreign policy. So Jimmy Carter just died. It was Jimmy Carter and Brzezinski, his national security advisor, who dreamt up the you know, foolish idea of destroying the government in Kabul, provoking a Soviet invasion in 1979, and then spending $3 billion of U.S. money and several $1 billion of Saudi money to create the Taliban, which created Al-Qaeda. And again, you look at the Syrian conflict, we were arming these groups. I think it's $500 million in arms. They call them the quote-unquote moderate rebels. So those contradictions are not new. And in fact, there was a moment in the Syrian conflict when we realized that arms had been passed into jihadist groups that were completely hostile to us and to the project in Iraq, and they began to bomb them. There was the U.S. warplanes were bombing them. So functioning as kind of Assad's de facto air force, it just is part of the whole folly of empire. And yes, you make an extremely good point. These are the people who now control, these are the people who control Syria.
Let me give you some breaking news, Chris. Reuters are reporting that the former Israeli Defense Minister Gallant is resigning from Parliament. He was fired from the government in November after months of disagreement over the conduct of the war, but he kept his seat as an elected member of the Knesset. Now, tonight, he has resigned from Parliament, presumably leaving politics. There was an emergency operation on Netanyahu himself this week. What's going on inside Israel in your view?
It's Netanyahu's consolidation of power. Remember, Gallant was favored by the United States in particular to replace Netanyahu. And Netanyahu, especially with the incursion into Lebanon, the strikes that have been carried out in Syria to degrade what's left of the Syrian military, the occupation of the buffer zone, so-called buffer zone on the Golan Heights, which is Syrian territory, including Mount Hermon. Now we see pictures on social media of Israelis skiing on Mount Hermon. This has made Netanyahu wildly popular. Netanyahu's hold on power immediately after October 7th was very precarious. He needed figures like Gallant. He doesn't need them anymore. So I think it's an indication of Netanyahu's strength within Israel.
Now, going back to the U.S., Donald Trump will be along in a minute. He's going to have a number of problems to deal with on the international level. If we could seriatim go through them, starting rather with the Middle East, in the wake of what would appear to be an ISIS Al-Qaeda terror outrage in the US, and maybe two. We don't know who blew up the Tesla cyber truck outside Trump's hotel in Las Vegas. The instinct of Donald Trump would be to take a hammer to the hornet's nest that is the Idlib nest of these terrorist organizations. And if he does, those that he doesn't kill will spill around the world, posing a danger to all of us. What do you think he's likely to do first in relation to Syria?
I mean, that is the big unknown. What will he do in Syria? He tends to be driven by events. So what happened in New Orleans, tends to provoke a reaction. It's often not particularly well thought out. I think we don't know. We don't know how he's going to handle Syria. Is he going to make the connections that, are obvious, the ones that you have made, tying ISIS and these groups to the current Syrian government and Golani? I don't know. I mean, that is, yeah. And Trump is impulsive. And so he's very hard to predict.
Yeah. How are things in the Maga camp? There was a Donnybrook going on the last time I looked between Steve Bannon, who represents the blue flame of MAGA, Put America First, and so on, and more globalist, more cosmopolitan elements like Elon Musk. Has that been solved? Has Trump stepped in? Or are we seeing a major fissure inside MAGA before Trump even gets back in the door?
I think it is a major fissure. I mean, Trump stepped in on the immigrant visas because, of course, high-tech companies want them. Tesla wants them. Musk brings in skilled workers from overseas on foreign visas. The MAGA base is hostile to the importation of immigrants to take jobs, especially high-tech jobs. But I don't think contradictions within MAGA is particularly new. I think the entire movement has been riven with contradictions, the most egregious being this kind of faux populism that Trump peddles, and then his subservience to the billionaire class and Wall Street. I used to say you can't vote against the interests of Goldman Sachs. It doesn't matter who you vote for. And Trump had Goldman Sachs employees in high positions in his administration, just as Obama and Biden and everyone else does. And Trump comes out of that world. He comes out of that world of high finance. But yes, I think you're right that there are contradictions. How stark will those fissures become, and what will that mean? I don't know. But I think those fissures have always been there.
Staying in the U.S. for a minute, I don't know if you watched it. I commend it to you and the viewers. It's on Disney, the new documentary Beatles 64, which talks about the invasion of the United States by the 4 Liverpool young men in 1964. It's a phenomenal documentary, but it opens with a kind of extended eulogy to President Kennedy. The Beatles arrived just not long after the murder of Kennedy in Dallas. In my view, a coup d'etat. And I got to wondering as I watched and dried a tear how far we've come and how far down we have sunk. From Jack Kennedy to Joe Biden and Donald Trump is a very long way. Are there any possibilities of the Democratic Party in the United States? Are they showing any signs of introspection, of intellectual search for renaissance? Or are they just a busted flush, in your opinion?
No, that's what's been so disturbing. Their whole post-mortem has been looking at or blaming anybody but themselves. So it's because Biden didn't drop out early enough. It's because Harris, didn't message properly. It's all about messaging and all about gimmicks. It's not about the fundamental issue, which is that the Democratic Party, particularly starting with the Clinton administration, although Jimmy Carter was part of this, sold out the working class, sold out working men and women. And that's just a reality that they won't acknowledge, nor, of course, their own complicity in doing it. So I don't see in all of the postmortems any grappling with why the Democratic Party, because it's not, and Bernie Sanders did make this point, that it's not just the white working class that's now walked out on the Democrats, it's the Latino working class and large sections of the black working class because of their betrayal by the Democrats. So I think that what we've seen following the election, remember, they're trying to resurrect Kamala Harris now to run for governor. They're talking about her, that they need to have her run in the next presidential race. This is, and the whole convention itself, the Democratic National Convention, which nominated a woman who never won a primary vote. There was no dissent. The campaign itself was celebrity-driven, Beyonce, Oprah, all this kind of stuff. Absolutely vapid, absolutely hollow. No, I think it's the death of the Democratic Party. I don't know what comes in its place, if anything. Trump has reconfigured the Republican Party, the establishment wing of the Republican Party, including Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney, her father, who left as a war criminal and left office with a 13% approval rating. The Democrats, or in particular Harris, were running around lauding the fact that they endorsed them. So the establishment wing of the Republican Party has migrated to the Democratic Party, fused with the Democratic Party, figures like Mitt Romney, and Trump has created a very cultish political organization. But I don't see any signs within the Democratic Party that it has the capacity for self-analysis, self-criticism, and real reform. And that's, of course, very dangerous.
And finally, it's very strange. I myself, in my monologue, attacked Jimmy Carter almost in exactly the same words that you have just criticized him. There is a tradition not to speak ill of the recently dead, but one cannot look at the whole post-Afghan intervention by Carter and Brzezinski. Brzezinski, the theorist of it, Carter, the political driver of it. If you think about it, that's 45 years ago. Those acts have, to a significant extent, shaped the events of the last 45 years. He wasn't any saint, Jimmy Carter, but he did do one thing that might help him at the pearly gates. He identified the apartheid nature of the Israeli state, something which has not been mentioned, I should tell you, in any of the Western panegyrics to which we've been treated on this side of the Atlantic. It's as if he never wrote that book after all.
Yes, of course he did that out of office. But in office, he orchestrated the Camp David Accords in 1979 between Sadat, president of Egypt, and Menachem Begin, where he sold out the Palestinians. He refused to allow the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, to even partake in the talks. All of the promises that Begin made to Carter to attempt to resolve the Palestinian question along with Jordan and Egypt, to permit Palestinian self-governance in the West Bank and Gaza within 5 years, to end Israeli settlements. None of it, as usual, none of it came to pass. Carter, in fact, accused Begin of lying. But the fact is there was no mechanism for enforcement at all for all of these promises, many of which were not even written down on paper. And Carter, like all U.S. presidents, was unwilling to defy the Israel lobby to impose sanctions. And the Palestinians, once again found themselves powerless and abandoned. And that was Carter. So we have to separate ex-President Carter from President Carter. I mean, I was covering the war in El Salvador at the time, and Archbishop Oscar Romero, later assassinated, begged Carter to cease weapon shipments to El Salvador, and Carter refused. I mean, he backed Mobutu in the Congo. He gave significant military aid to the Indonesian government when it was carrying out the genocide in East Timor. He actually walked away from the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks Treaty, SALT II, with the Soviet Union, which sought to curb nuclear weapons deployment. He had a pretty nasty, he supported UNITA, the murderous counter-revolutionary group led by Jonas Savimbi, along with the Khmer Rouge. So, and Ferdinand Marcos. And of course, you mentioned the Mujahideen, which he in essence created along with the Saudis, the Taliban in the war in Afghanistan, which left 1.5 million Afghans dead. So is a pretty dark record as president.